of this workshop to lay off my disorganization on that, that I hope this could actually be a conversation. One thing I really don't like about Left Forum is it feels like it's very non-conversational, and a lot of people talking for way too long on panels, and we don't actually have the ability to talk to each other. So I would actually hope that could happen here to prefigure the world we want to see. So that's what I hope. I'll put some things out that we could maybe think about for a conversation. So I want to start out with a couple anecdotes. I've spoken at every Left Forum on panels since it began, which wasn't so long ago, 2004, with the exception of one that I skipped because I wanted to go to something that I felt was much more vibrant and connected to movements, called the National Conference on Organized Resistance in DC. I like working with youth who have the energy, enthusiasm, and still believe that they can change the world in a way some of us have lost to some degree. So that was the 1 year. But the very first year, which was in 2004, some of the organizers knew me and were friends with me and asked me if I would want to come be on a panel. I was like, sure, because I love doing public education and being on a panel. I think we should all be public intellectuals and go out and talk to each other constantly. So I said, yeah. And then I ended up looking at the program as it got closer to the time. It was going to be a panel on Marxism and anarchism, like this one. And I started looking, I was like, wait a minute, I'm actually the only anarchist on this panel. And I'm actually the only anarchist at the entire Left Forum. And there are 750 speakers this year. Now, there may not have been as many that year, but it was pretty disturbing to me that left didn't include anarchism. And I was on a panel that was about why anarchism was wrong. So at a time when anarchism was the cutting edge vibrancy of what was the movements going on in this country. So the enthusiasm, to contrast to the National Conference and Organized Resistance, where the zeitgeist was horizontalism, a politics from below, where anarchism was igniting a new generation of leftists, that I was the only person asked to be there. So I said I won't do it unless there's another anarchist. Andre got to be on the panel with me, and Chris Dixon. So there were three of us. One of the Marxists on the panel had actually sent out a paper which he planned to present, which said anarchism is a politics without a plan, which is meant to be an insult. And I actually love that because in a way it combines some of the tension between anarchism and Marxism, in a sense. That plans sometimes are good and sometimes they're bad. And maybe we need to think about when we want them to. I actually didn't know if that was a criticism or a compliment, because I understand anarchism as a politics of a process, but sometimes we need plans too. So I thought it was it could have been a better conversation. It ended up, actually was a good panel. Okay. Another little anecdote, last weekend in New York, there was a New York Anarchist Book Fair, the third year, which had always done that weekend in April. Left Forum decided to move from March to April. And again, I'm friends with the organizers, so I'm like, there's an anarchist book fair that has workshops that's happening, always has been at this time. Maybe you should be considerate and not put them within the same time period. And they're like, oh, there's a book fair in New York that anarchists do? And the fact that people don't know about this, the difference between who's here and who's at each, there's very little overlap, which I find really sad. And I want to compliment the Midnight Notes Collective for actually speaking at both. And I really have been really inspired by the fact that they've tried to draw both traditions and spaces together. Okay. So enough. The last anecdote I'll do is yesterday I was on a panel about prefigurative politics, and all of us came from the sort of anarchist or libertarian left tradition, and someone in the question and answer period said, and none of us actually said anyone needed to become an anarchist or that anarchism was right, or we were actually I thought very good at complexifying how we understood prefigurative politics to happen. And she said, I can't believe you're all speaking from an anarchist perspective, like that feels really, alienated, what about the rest of us? And I was like, wow, every other panel you go to here, no one's like, I can't believe you're speaking from a Marxist perspective. So I'm not saying this to say, but what I find disturbing is, and this is one thing I think we should have conversations about, and anarchists do this just as much as Marxists do, we see each other in two separate hostile camps, where at the anarchist book fair, we're like, wow, do we really want Marxists to come speak? And I'm actually an anarcho-communist, so I actually understand my anarchism and communism having a very intimate, wonderful relationship to each other could potentially be quite more prefigurative and fruitful than it has been largely. So I find it disturbing at different events that people perceive one thing to be out of, like, I understand myself as part of the left. So for the conversation for me between anarchism and Marxism is, what has been very disturbing for me, and what I didn't like about Welby's and Zapatista, as much as I love the book and thought it was really charming and really re-inspired me to think about how people organize, is that there was this idea of that, in a sense, and maybe I won't, very tired, disorganized, that anarchism sort of is coming late or in reaction to, and I actually think what's more interesting is to say that there has always been a libertarian left tradition in socialism. I've been really inspired by Gustav Landauer, whose book Called to Socialism. Most anarchists understood themselves as socialists. And that we actually came from the same milieu, the same time period, and the fight isn't between Marxism and anarchism. I really dislike that phrasing of it. It's between a libertarian socialist, a libertarian left tradition, and a less or non-libertarian left tradition. And Richard Gombin's work, which I really liked, it needs to be reprinted, Origins of Modern Leftism and the Revolutionary Tradition. He makes a lovely argument that we've both always been there, and what has happened is the more non-libertarian traditions have written the history books, have been the victors and the Soviet Union and things, and have written out and created antagonisms. So what he draws together under the libertarian left tradition is everything from council communism, Western Marxism, Lukács, Frankfurt School, situationists, dissident Marxists, anarchists, we could add autonomous Marxists today. And that is a tradition I see myself in. So I think this conversation would be more helpful in a way. It's like, when you were speaking, I'm like, I feel it's less the antagonism between Marxism and anarchism than between a libertarian tradition and a non-libertarian one. And within anarchism and Marxism, there are actually tensions between libertarian and non-libertarian traditions within both each.